Hello, everybody. Sorry, I didn't click the go live button. Apologies for this. We're a bit behind schedule because I'm an idiot. Welcome to the first Take It Offline, and apologies for the delay there. Earlier this year, we've been chatting about basically doing an event, and it turns out that we didn't really want to do an online event. We didn't want to do another Zoom party, something like that, because that's kind of not something which we really wanted to do. But as we were talking about it, this lockdown has been going on for a little bit of time now. 2020 has been dragging on, and we sort of said, if we could have the ultimate panel, would we do it? And we kind of went, yeah, we would. So we've actually got the ultimate panel joining us. We've got James, Gurd, Jon Burkhart, Aleyda, Will, and Jennifer Hoffman. All of these people are experts in brand, growing brands, developing brands, personal brands, all of it. And so we actually thought, you know what, let's do it. Let's actually do this. And amazingly, when they said yes, we've kind of managed to do this. So excuse this, because we've not really experts in doing the online sort of panel things. SEMrush have been kind enough to say that they're going to send out swag to everybody who has registered and has filled in a form. They sent it to us, and it's actually locked in the office in Rise at 7 because of the lockdown. So apologies for that. It will get sent out as soon as possible. And where are we? So yeah, basically we've got a couple of prizes as well, which are SEMrush Guru accounts for 6 months. And the first one will be for the best picture, which we'll go into in a bit, and the best question as asked in the chat. So if you ask an amazing chat question, then we will basically decide a winner from that. It'll probably be Jon, because Jon loves the best questions. Okay.
We're actually celebrating our 4-year anniversary this month, so we want to say a huge thank you to all the amazing people that have attended throughout the years. It's been 4 years we celebrated the first one, which is a roundtable event in Brighton, a room below a pub. We've got a video coming up highlighting the events that we've had over the past couple of years to show how it's evolved, from the pub meetups to the event we accidentally organised in 2 weeks with our first drunk panel, to the event with Gerry Schwartz and then our ventures abroad in Amsterdam. We've had some amazing support throughout the years from folks like Hannah, Jono, Nick, Omi, Arnaut, Judith, Ross, just to name a few, have gone above and beyond to really make this event awesome. We'll be returning back to Take It Offline, the non-recorded version, very soon with a beverage in hand. So we look forward to welcoming you all to that. Gerry, do you want to take away for video?
4 years. I was in my 20s then.
So what a great recap of our past events. Usually in true TIO style, we kickstart events with a Kahoot quiz game. However, tonight we're talking about brands, growing a brand, delivering a brand, and how we see brands in our lives. So the game tonight is a competition looking at, so if you grab your phone and look at maybe the last 5-10 photos taken in your phone and submit the image you think represents a brand, whether it's good or bad, and then tweet it to us with the hashtag TIO chat. And before the end of the night, we'll select the image which best shows us how a brand interacts with someone's life. So the prize is a 6-month account with SEMrush Guru. So thank you to our lovely friends at SEMrush.
Cool. Let's add in Will.
Hello.
Hey,
Hello.
Will.
Eurovision. This is great. Cheers.
Cool. Okay. Shall we add in the rest of the panel? And we're going to drop out. Will, I'll let you take over.
Amazing. Well, I'm excited to talk everything brand. Hi, guys.
Howdy.
Hi.
This evening.
Good, thank you. Cheers, guys. Very excited. Cheers.
Happy brand. So I thought, first of all, to kind of kick off, we'll just kind of go through all about different reasons for brands, what's happening now, especially through the pandemic and everything that's happening there, and then just talking about kind of brand and product, and then how different brands have kind of reacted and how they've grown that. So I'll kick off, and then we'll just kind of go from there and see how things go, if that's okay. Let's go for it. So first of all, my question that I would ask is brand advertising under serious threat as digital drives kind of this short-termism, as we should say, or is it a great opportunity for digital to add to brand advertising in terms of the short-term gain, should we say? Who wants to kick off?
Depends on your brand, right? So literally like 4 days ago, I was retweeting something from Ryanair, and I was literally saying like, I never expected to tweet something from Ryanair, but it was some hilarious joke with one of Trump's sons saying like, don't worry, if you cannot use the Air Force Ones anymore, you can come with one of an amazing offers across Europe, things like that, right? So, but of course, it's Ryanair, and they sort of tend to leverage this type of thing. It will have been completely different with another type of brand. So it depends if it is within your own culture, the profile of the brand, and if it fits well with your actual value and how you usually interact with your audience, right?
Yeah. I was going to say, go on. Sorry, Jem.
No, I was just going to say, I think that, through the pandemic has proved more than ever how important brand is right now. I think that, it's those organizations that are really doubling down on brand advertising now above and beyond performance advertising that are going to come through this, dare I say, less scathed than some others because they've taken the time to invest in that brand. And, brand drives your customer loyalty. I think to Aleyda's point as well, depending upon what your brand stands for and represents, your brand can also very much be a strong sales driver without having to try and sell to the end customer. And I think that, as we've been able to literally track and quantify and identify the ROI on every single penny that we spend via performance marketing, we've kind of leaned away from brand or investing in brand from a paid perspective. And I think that that's a really big mistake.
Mm-hmm. An interesting thing that I've seen as well is, all the big media stories are about massive brands with big budgets doing really cool things, like Avon putting $1 million fund in to support frontline workers, which is amazing. But actually, what I've noticed locally is some businesses really grasp like you were talking about, Jen and Aleyda, about building a brand and building that community thing, and understood that showing their true values and supporting local communities would actually build their audience better than just, here's 20% off, here's 30%. So one of our local companies, right from the start, prioritised NHS staff, gave them free home delivery so that they didn't have to come out to the stores at that special hour of the day when it was busy, and actually went that extra mile. And it's those little things that elevate the service delivery and prove that you actually care. And I think younger generations especially are much more in tune with brands that actually give a toss about their customers and aren't just about selling.
This is really, sorry.
No, go ahead, Aleyda.
No, I think it was also a really good opportunity for many brands to show thought leadership and authority. So, for example, one of my clients are from the hospitality sector. And of course, they have been some of the most hit. So they had a COVID hub sharing stats about what was seen across the different markets, what they expected. They invited experts, they did webinars. So they educated about what was happening in the industry, how they could help, how people could help to support many of these different type of companies and share resources to any of this type of companies across the industry that might need those sort of insights to get them to take them back on their feet. And many of these experts that were advising like big hotel chains, but not to the little boutique one, some ideas and tips like that. So it was a great opportunity, I think, to show indeed, like, to give back to your community on one hand, and then show how you are a real leader in your industry, and how, and that was also an important aspect, I think, to show and leverage. And then on the other hand, for those companies that were suffering, so for example, I have this scenario with a cruise line, right? They shifted completely their spend on developing content that will connect and advise and support all of their customers that were asking for refunds or struggling or trying to cancel out or looking for help or different options, right? So to be there, to create this presence, whether with search or with any other type of format or content format or channel, to be there whenever your customer look for you for help or because they are struggling or whatever type of scenario, this was the time. And I think that many companies, especially across the hospitality tourism sector, they have done very well to leverage this opportunity and to make the most out of the situation, right?
Yeah.
Sorry. Just to go tap into what Aleyda's saying, specifically within the travel world. I also work in that sector, and I love seeing examples, like Aleyda said, about going through these phases of right in the beginning of lockdown. It was about educating, like, okay, we didn't see this coming. What are our people doing? Like, I work with influencers, so we've had to talk to them and say, so what are you going to be doing? You're not going to be traveling. And then it's almost like we see them making these bold pivots, and we as a brand have to go with them on that. So our travel influencer is no longer travel, but her feed has become 100% yoga. She is now a yoga teacher. She is not a traveler, and that's fine. Our brand doesn't relate to yoga, but we relate to her as a human being who is now yoga. So we now support yoga, even though it's not even in our DNA or our personas or our strategy. We support human beings. And I think if the brands who do that, who go with the bold pivots of their people, will continue to win.
Yeah.
What's interesting, actually, I was going to say, Jon, to that point as well. I was very fortunate at the very beginning of the first lockdown back in April time to be invited to join kind of like a closed door webinar with a whole bunch of CMOs across mainly the US and the UK. And it was, the likes of Hilton's global CMO was there, Salesforce's global CMO was there. There were some really big brand names. And one of the themes that kept radiating as all of these CMOs were talking about how their brands were pivoting was having empathy for their customers and saying that our marketing team, our sales team, every commercial entity that we have that normally would be for customer acquisition now needs to pivot to become customer support. How can we humanize our brands and be there in a way that our customers can rely on us, even if it extends outside of the scope in which our services or our product offering is for them? And it was, I think, again, tying it all back to the idea of brand is that, your brand has to be there and your brand has to stand for something at the end of the day for your customer base.
I think just before we kind of continue, it'd be good to kind of just maybe introduce each one of you and just the brands that you represent, whether that's your personal brand or necessarily kind of any brands that you work with particularly as well. So I'll just go around and then we can just kind of go from there and then we'll continue with some questions. But James, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I think I'm the outlier here. I'm the charlatan masquerading as a brand person. So I'm an e-commerce and re-platforming consultant. So I don't really represent brands, but I work more around the whole technology and digital strategy piece around e-commerce. So I work for shorter periods of time with brands to accelerate their e-commerce capability. So fashion and beauty, I've worked in brands like Victoria Beckham, Vashi Jewelry, and then big department stores like House of Fraser through to big FMCG brands like Mars, and then electrical retailers like Samsung. So it's a real broad mix, but it's not so much on the digital marketing execution. Okay, cool. Jon?
Yep. So I work as a content marketing consultant and keynote speaker and workshop leader. All that speaking and traveling with focus on sport and travel has massively changed. My first foray was that little circle there into the speaking was when my newsjacking book came out when I met Gerry years ago. But I've had to make a bold pivot, as have my travel influencers. And the reality is digital transformation is not the CIO's job. It's not the CEO's job. And as the Marketunist said, it is the COVID's job, because essentially we all have to become more digital as long as that digitalization is customer centric. So that's been my new mission, as opposed to getting my travel and sport brands back, because that's been slow.
Yeah, amazing. Aleyda?
Yes, I am an SEO, and I honestly don't know why invited me for a brand type of roundtable, but no. Well, I guess that I am my own brand. I am an SEO consultant, and I usually tend to work with big brands too, but doing the non-sexy, non-brand related work of improving and growing their search results and profits. But then on the other hand, I also have my own project, Remoters, that I am trying to build also as a brand remote work. And that is also part of my own brand, right? Because I am remote and I am evangelizing all the time about it.
Yeah, no, I think that's super important. Obviously, you've got huge experience in building your own personal brand. So that's got something that we'll be talking about a little bit later in terms of personal brand and what you think of that and how people can grow that. But no, 100%.
I think that when I brand my stuff, though, I could pick better the names, because sign up for Aleyda it's on SEO Mofo instead of FOMO. Thank you very much. But yes.
I love Mofo.
You just
it's for SEO Mofos too.
Sorry.
Aleyda,
Gerry's the Mofo.
That domain now before it goes.
Yeah, we can't make excuses for Gerry though, can we really? And Jen?
Yeah. So basically right now I'm currently VP of marketing at a new London-based fintech startup called Bank, which is a hard pivot away from the SEO industry, in which I have worked in for roughly the last 7 years, building some great brands inside of the SEO tech space. So yeah, now I'm building a brand inside of the fintech world, which is fundamentally polar opposite, if you will, from the SEO space, but it poses its own set of challenges. And as you know, kind of Jon was just saying, I think that COVID right now and the pandemic and the lockdown is really, I think, amplifying a lot of those opportunities to build a fintech brand. You know, everyone is pivoting towards cashless payments and digital payments, and really taking a look at how they can become more efficient with their customer and user experiences on their websites, kind of to James's point there a little bit. So that is me. I think I'm actually the only one who represents a brand here on the brand panel.
Everyone's got their own personal brand.
We're all gate crashing.
It's okay. I'll let it slide.
That kind of leads into my next question, where I was going to kind of talk about how you or your clients, or how you've handled it for your particular brand, whether that's a personal brand. How have you handled it during the pandemic in terms of communication? Like, have you had to totally shift in the way that you've worked in normal? I mean, like, for us as a business at Rise at 7, we've had to totally change what we did with our clients. I'm presuming you guys have all been in the similar situations. Amazing. Who wants to go first?
Yes, in different ways, indeed. So, for example, taking back to the example of the hospitality client that I have, coincidentally, this was very funny, right? We thankfully, and this is how it shows how search should be very well aligned, and it's the best defense is a good offense, because they had been doing all of this sort of actions of sharing insights about COVID. So when you search about the brand, there was some news related type of content going on along the brand, right? COVID related too. And then all of a sudden, because they are a school, they had a COVID spread across their students, and they started getting coverage about their brand plus COVID, right? And all of a sudden, for a few of the searches regarding the brand, you could see this not necessarily positive type of results that you want to see your brand being shown for, but then thankfully, because they had so much content going on also regarding coronavirus, etc., that lasted pretty much for a couple of days only. And after that, after the freshness passed by, you could see again the wrong content, the one that they control, ranking very well, and also the wrong type of press release or update regarding the situation, how they had handled it in a very straightforward and direct way. So I think this shows the importance of something that many people connect more work with the technical side of things like SEO, right? To know how to optimize every single action, information that you share, any insights, FAQs with your community, with your customers, to make the most out of every opportunity, to own your SERPs, to control very well the visibility that you get, the share, and well, at the end of the day, how your brand is reflected in search results that are relevant for you, especially when these are branded searches too.
Yeah, and I think from especially because I'm speaking from a PR point of view during the pandemic as well, with the press just totally shifted. Like everything that I've learned over the past 10 years literally just went out the window. So Jon, is that something that you kind of, obviously from a news tracking point of view, you'd be able to, obviously that's what you're used to in terms of jumping on stories that are trending. How did you find it during the pandemic?
So how many stages are there of sort of denial? I think there's a lot, and I went through all of them. So yeah, it was quite tough being the guy that tries my best to live this philosophy called urgent genius. I'm definitely always urgent, but rarely, occasionally genius. But it was very hard because, again, the travel influencers I wanted to speak to. I needed to be where they are. I needed to call them up and talk about yoga if that's what they wanted to talk about, or I've had to add this little letter and it changes everything. So my sport clients, I literally had to add the E in front of that and say, okay, we can't talk about sport because it's not happening. But wait a second, your professional footballers are actually going online and playing esports, and everyone's watching, and now it's on ESPN. And so all these things that I've been talking about and evangelizing for years at the conferences that I speak at have become front and center because esports is a big deal now because we can't do the regular sport. But I'm still trying to marry my old world. And I do feel like we've been in this education phase, as Aleyda said, but I think we are coming out where we need to kind of educate, but also inform and entertain, because some of us are getting sick of this lockdown thing. Yeah, no, definitely. And I think from the point of view of the press, for example, we always saw that they were starting to get bored of all this negative news that's been keeping turning around, and you need to bring something positive to it, whether that's with inspirational stories that you bring if you're in the travel industry or something like that, definitely. But James, I feel like you were kind of saying something from an e-commerce point of view towards the kind of COVID and the pandemic.
Yeah, I think it kind of aligns with what Aleyda was saying earlier about monitoring and reacting and being adaptive, because from an e-commerce point of view, you have technology, but you have to be able to reuse that technology to suit the current situation. And the brands that I've seen do things smart are the ones who've looked at, like, they might have an on-site feature like an appointment booking system, which is really common in luxury brands. All of a sudden the stores are closed, you can't book appointments. That's one of your key drivers of engaging customers and getting people into sales funnels. Well, actually repurposing that to booking online video consultations and slightly pivoting that feature into something else and realigning your customer service team, suddenly you're giving customers that value add service, but you're doing it in a way that's, can work in the current times. And it's the brands that are adapting and thinking about how they continue the service, but in a different way, for me, the ones that are still maintaining the customer satisfaction.
Mm-hmm. No, definitely. I feel like all that I've been saying over the past 6 months was pivot. Everyone needs to pivot and totally change. Like every business adapted, whether that was like a small coffee shop at the end of our street or like a huge international travel company. So yeah, that's super interesting. Okay, so kind of moving from the pandemic, we'll kind of look at, I want to move into kind of more brand and product and how a brand can kind of show their products through the brand. So kind of what we've always said is one thing that some companies do is pull that brand through the product, whether that's Netflix, whether that's Pornhub, whether that's Tinder, and they kind of actually show that. But James, I think this question is kind of more aimed at you, but how important is it keeping the brand through all the touch points of off page as well as kind of on page as well? So Google search results right through to the purchase end of things as well.
Yeah, I find this an interesting one because I've worked with a lot of brand-driven e-commerce organizations where too often the brand teams make the wrong decisions and the brand teams are controlling an e-commerce trading decision, which is the wrong way around. And where I've seen the balance right and where often it's a bit of a delicate battle is to get brand teams to realize that product decisions around e-commerce are made by the product specialist. but they're the guardians from a kind of tonality and execution point of view, and they're like an internal service department, not the decision maker. And I think this is where the balance needs to be got right. But fundamentally, everything you execute online can, annoy your customers, or it can misrepresent your brand. So there has to be a good set of guidelines that everybody understands and buys into, and whether that's a brand Bible, whether it's a set of instructions, whatever it might be, so that you don't have somebody who joins who's suddenly writing copy on a website that's totally off tone with a marketing campaign, so that somebody gets a marketing campaign that's all jovial and fun, and then a completely deadpan serious website that jars. Because if you see that when things aren't well aligned, you end up with poor performance in campaigns because you set false expectations. I think there are some brands that do it really, really smartly, like Palace Skateboards. I don't know if anyone's ever bought from Palace Skateboards. You go and look at their product descriptions. I'm genuinely hoping they haven't changed since I last looked at them about a month or so ago, but their product descriptions are completely alien to what everyone would consider good practice for e-commerce, which is describe your product, add your attributes. It's basically like two teenage kids getting stoned talking to each other. So they know who their audience is. They know how to create something that's going to appeal to them and create a differentiation in the marketplace. And they know how to execute that. But the e-commerce team know how to do it, and the marketing team know how to do it, so it's aligned. So they don't get that brand friction where a brand team is trying to do something in maybe offline media, and a digital team, which is very good at trading, doesn't understand the nuances of the brand translation.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. We've just had a question come in. I feel like I'm a live news presenter now. Coming through to the chat, I'm loving it. It's from Jeff Kennedy. So he's asked, where do you draw the line between riding the back of current events versus doing your own thing? Obviously, you need to consider the current situation, but is there value in breaking away from it? Ooh. Go on.
So this is something that we heavily had a lot of conversations about at Banked early on was, how much do we embrace the narrative around coronavirus and lockdown versus how much do we kind of maintain on course with the message and the conversation that we want to be putting out to market. And actually, I think that in the initial stages of the pandemic, when it was new and fresh, you 100% as a brand had to address it, right? You had to make sure that you were delivering the necessary information so that your customer and your customer base and your community understood what their expectation needed to be of you as a brand. But I think then very quickly what you found is that everyone was talking about it. So therefore, us actually delivering content that was more about our industry, about the messaging that we were trying to seed into our industry, actually started to become a nice breath of fresh air and a nice breakaway from all of the conversation happening around the pandemic and lockdown. But I think you've got to again make sure that it aligns with your brand and make sure that your brand isn't kind of centered around sort of pop culture and current events, because if it is, then I think you can't really deviate too much away from that for differentiation's sake.
There are different levels, I believe, but you definitely don't want to be tone deaf, right? I remember very well sending the first SEO FOMO after the pandemic, and everybody started to be literally locked down around the world. And I couldn't manage myself to send a newsletter without mentioning something regarding people are dying. We are going through a very difficult time. Sorry, but well, just for you to maybe disconnect a little bit, here are the latest SEO news. But I needed to refer to it in a certain way. Otherwise, it would be very bad. Then on the other hand, it depends how it affects your business model and your own business at the end of the day, right? So for example, with remoters, we had the job board, right? When the whole lockdown started, a lot of people unfortunately lost their jobs. And then on the other hand, we could see this increase of traffic on the website that literally talk about remote work. And I was again saying, I don't want to be yet another work from home type of guide or resource, because we have literally been talking about this for years already. We already have a lot of remote work resources, but this is not how people were searching for them. They were about work from home struggle during lockdown or incapacity to concentrate or things like that, right? So it literally pushed me to, on one hand, start writing guides focused on those particular use cases, and then on the other hand, to refresh the remote work trend. And this is funny, right? And it can literally tells you how Google reacts to this freshness type of topics, because the work from home remote work guides that we literally update every year on January. I had updated the one of 2020 in January, and it had stopped ranking because Google couldn't see that we had mentioned anything regarding COVID or coronavirus. I updated it a little bit, literally with a little paragraph to refer to the resources that we were creating about this particular topic. And then we started ranking again because query the freshness, right? So we can see different aspects of it. And my point is, on one hand, you cannot be tone deaf. On the other hand, up to which point you really want to merge into that depends on how it affects directly or indirectly your community, your customers. So for just one last point, right? At some point, we could see that we had a lot of traffic and requests more about people looking for jobs rather than actually new jobs coming through to be published. That thankfully changed at the end of May. And now we have a record number of jobs being published. Thank goodness, right? But for a month and a half, there were more people requesting for jobs. And then I decided to enable this section of remote professionals looking for new job opportunities to give visibility to great professionals that had been laid off because of the pandemic, right? So I think that you can also give back in a way that is very relevant to what you do, that doesn't take you out of your focus, and at the end of the day also helps you to grow more. So it's a win-win type of a scenario.
Yeah.
Just off the back of that, I want to try to be as energetic as Aleyda because I really was hanging on your.
There's no point in even trying, John. I've been trying to do it for years.
What Aleyda's.
Was that?
I was saying I got some what Aleyda's had. Great drink.
No, it was brilliant. So I feel that what we've gone through in trying to relate to the customers better, we've gone through stages, and the big brands have been a little bit slower. So they put out these videos that were obviously stock footage, and they had the buzzwords of unprecedented times, we're here with you, blah, 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 and it all came out at once. And therefore it felt like I don't need another one of those. And if you think about during lockdown, we went through these phases of figuring out what social distancing means. So people would change their logos to be socially distant logos. Then we went through this thing about hands and washing hands. And if you were some guys in China and you could do a TikTok video and make hand washing the correct way of doing hand washing fun, then that was great. But when a brand tried to copy that same thing, it may not have gone down well. So it is context, and I hate to admit it in the newsjacking sense, but it is about sort of being first and not just copying what everyone else is doing. And then we all had to look at the tone deaf brands, as Aleyda said. And Gerry, I think I want to go on and do the 2-finger thing. Can we go on and put this 10 seconds that you'll never be able to unsee? Let me set it up. This is a brand that we're like not sure. They're like, do we really need to pull this? I'm not, I know washing hands and the virus is a big deal, but are you sure we need to pull it? Well, Twitter told them after they decided not to pull it that they should pull it. I'm only giving you 10 seconds of this, but you will never be able to unsee this on live television in the United States of America. Play for 10 seconds, Gerry.
Oh, that does look good. You gotta try this. That's so good.
Can you imagine? Can you imagine with all of us talking about washing your hands? You got to do it this way. Can you imagine a brand team thinking
that was
okay? I think we can let that go. I mean, and I just wanted us to like here on TIO say we can put 2 fingers up to a lot of things, but we don't need to put them in the cheese dip, and we don't need to be so tone deaf as to ask our customers whether we should take that down. That's just like offensive.
Yeah, but it's like KFC. Obviously, they adapted to that. Like, did you obviously see the billboard where it was like finger licking good? They took it out. They took out their finger licking. So there is brands that are doing it well, and there's some that are literally just not thinking. Someone's pressed send on or kept on their ad as well, which is quite interesting. Okay, we've got a few more questions coming in. So I think let's move on to kind of more personal brands. So we've had this question from Donna Kelly, and she said, how important is personal brand? Example, a director, CEO, owner of a business in terms of building their business brand as well?
In the context of what are we talking about? In the context of like customer acquisition, or context of
I think let's go for customer acquisition in terms of how important is it building your brand to actually generate revenue, generate custom.
So I'll say something quickly, but then I'll hand over to the people who are probably better placed to answer this. But I think for some businesses it's totally irrelevant. So having worked with a lot of big B2B companies, whoever the chairman is of that B2B company is not going to drive fundamentally, especially in their kind of small business audience, who's going to buy from them. But in some brands in the consumer space, I mean, look at BrewDog. Actually, BrewDog has got quite a good reputation amongst the customers, but also the investor customers, because they love what the owner represents. And then Tesla with Musk, there's a few brands where actually the personality of that person plays a role in driving, I guess it's polarization of it's Marmite, like people either love it or hate it. The ones who love it really love it.
Yeah. I think also to that point, James, is that when you have a founder that becomes the face of the brand, if that founder has built that brand out of a sheer passion for whatever their industry or their product or their service is, you can't ever replicate that, right? And the end customer feels that and is naturally drawn to that sense of passion and drive. I think though that to the actual question that Donna asked, I don't think it always has to be a figurehead or an executive leader that creates a personal brand. I mean, I speak from experience from my former company where, I built a marketing team full of SEO industry newbies that now are household names for anyone who works inside of the SEO industry, and they were some of the most junior members of our organization that had the biggest personal brands that had the most impact on our entire organization. I mean, I had people like Ruth Everett, where it was her second job ever at the ripe old age of 22, and she had a fundamentally massive impact on our organization at 22, being the most junior member of the entire company. So it doesn't always have to be that executive, that director, that CEO, that owner. It can just be somebody who's passionate about the product, the service, or the company or the industry in which they serve.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense, because obviously you made at your brand, you made the customers the brand, and that was impressive. Can you kind of talk us through that a little bit more of how you made the customer the brand?
Yeah, of course. So I think it all kind of stems way back. When I first came into the SEO industry, I fundamentally knew nothing about SEO, let alone technical SEO. And so I kind of made it my mission to know the people if I didn't know the practice itself. And I think through that, what I really started to identify was that SEOs are actually great storytellers, despite the fact that they're very analytical and data-driven individuals. And so I just really started making the end customer part of our brand storytelling. And, I think that there's no stronger sales tool or marketing tool that exists, no matter what industry that you work within, than happy customers talking about how much they love your product or your service. I think that is the biggest win of all. And so thus in turn, that just became, I think, very much the heart of my marketing strategy at both of my former companies. And it very much is part of the strategy that we employ at banks.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's cool. And we've kind of had quite a few. Oh, sorry, did you have something to say, Aleyda?
Yes, I wanted to point out something that for me is very obvious like in my case, for example, having a personal brand, right? It can be a double-edged sword, right? Yeah. Because as you will mention, the very obvious examples of Elon Musk, right? You whether love it or hate it, you know that he has this drive and he's passionate. So, I'm going to buy this car because I know that it's going to happen, even if it's going to be released in 2 years, because this guy is going to make it happen, yes or yes, right? But the same thing now after, he had said a few things or had a couple of stances that you might not necessarily agree with, for example, regarding coronavirus, things like that. It's like, oh my God, I don't want to keep supporting the business of this guy because he's reckless, this type of reaction. So you need to be very careful if you rely on your personal brand or how you communicate yourself or how you are perceived. Because, for example, in my personal example, right, since I am an SEO consultant, one of my unique selling propositions is that I will be working directly with my clients. If for some reason, I don't know, they don't like talkative people or direct or straightforward people like I am, or they don't like me for any reason, or because they hate remote work and they know that I love remote work, they won't want to hire me, which is more than okay if I am representing something, or if it is because of something that I really truly believe. It's more than okay if they don't believe in remote work, they don't want to be associated with me. It's perfect for me. But if you communicate something that is not necessarily what you really believe, or there is a miscommunication or something like that, so you really need to be very careful, because how you are perceived is it will become critical on buying from you or investing on you, things like that, right? So yeah.
I just wanted to chip in.
Oh, go on. Sorry, quick.
Just a quick one on that, because I listened to I was in a session with the very opinionated Mark Ritson, Australian, writes for Marketing Week a lot, and he said that addressing this issue, he works with big brands, and he said, like, he works with Donna Karan, and he calls it being a fake founder. Because essentially when a brand grows, especially when the name is on the door, like Donna Karan's is, you can launch a brand like that, but then you're going to have to go to the back or change what you stand for based on the brand being taken over. Like Burberry was taken over by a whole different set of people until Angela Ahrendts came in and changed it. So the founder of Burberry would have had to change who they were based on where the people took it. So I thought that was an interesting thing about how founders can't just be 100% true to themselves. Richard Branson has not been able to be the face of Virgin for the entire time. He's had to go in the background. But I think it's different with personal brands for, smaller businesses like myself. I do a lot of public speaking, and they hire me for my energy. I do emceeing, etc. I think that's been hard to replicate in lockdown, and that's why I've had to transition it into finding out what they need and finding out how I can help them, even though it's not a live session, because they're not doing live sessions. So it's interesting to try to look at yourself and see what is pandemic proof. And my personality on stage has not been pandemic proof. I've done very little stage work since February.
Yeah, no, definitely. On the personal brand note, we've just had a question that come in that I think would be quite interesting from quite a few of you. But they've asked, how do you counter the argument/fear from some businesses that an employee will build their own personal brand on company time and then leave with that personal brand? So, Jen, I feel like you've got something brewing. What are you saying?
Yeah. So as a product of this entire scenario, I know firsthand exactly what that's like. Both as somebody who curated a personal brand and then walked away from an organization, as well as somebody who has helped others curate their own brands, and they also too have walked away. And I think that is a risk you as a business have to take 100% of the time. You have to be appreciative and you have to leverage that opportunity while you have that individual. And if you have built a strong enough company culture to keep that individual, then fair play to you. And I think if that individual leaves, there's one of two things that has happened. That company culture you've built is no longer a fit for that individual, or they feel that they've outgrown their role, which also stems back to the fact that your organization didn't identify that early on enough to create a new role for that person and understand the value that they bring to the table with that personal brand. I think that companies miss that all the time. They're so afraid of that person walking out the door after gaining all of that equity that they never allow the business to invest in individuals. And I think that businesses who invest in individuals, whether or not it's for them to build their own personal brand to represent the company or not, are the businesses that have those employees that are there for 5, 10, 15 years, which you don't see anymore. So I think that companies that don't want to allow their employees to build a personal brand miss out on two different aspects there.
And they also ruin it, because in this time, as we know, I used to be an ad agency copywriter, so I know a lot of creatives. They will ruin the chance to have them back. And in this world, people are going back to the companies they've worked for 5, 10, even 15 years, unless the company burned the bridge by being so irritated that they left. So I do worry about those companies, but how they're treating their customers in this era of being customer centric. If they can't even treat their people like respect, you go on and plow your own field. That worries me, but it happens all the time.
You know, I 100% agree with what Jen mentioned. And it only made me remember when I was still an employee, and that feeling of when you are working in an organization where you feel that you don't have all the flexibility, and the first thing that you tend to think when you are invited to speak somewhere as an employee is like, oh, now I will need to ask my boss. Let's see what they think, right? So that is already a bad feeling. Is already an alert for the employee that they are not 100%, let's say, comfortable where they are, right? So they should have this type of flexibility and support, because at the end of the day, that can only translate into more authority to the organization, to the business, more links, more referrals, more. So I think it can only be something positive if at some point the person moves on, or at least they have leveraged that for that time, right? And they can foster even more of those type of talents inside, right? So it doesn't need at all to be something negative.
I think that's the critical thing is if somebody's strong, sorry, Jon, if somebody's strong and talented and has ambition, if you suppress it, they're going to get really pissed off and go anyway and have a bad thing to say about your business, which is not good. And actually 2 years of someone who's outstanding is better than 6 months of someone who's got their back up and is annoyed with you. And you're right, you've got to facilitate that and look at how that benefits your business. Spot on, Aleyda. I mean, I've been in that situation where at working in an agency myself, where I was trying to build my personal brand years ago, and it was frowned upon, even though whilst doing it, the whole point was to then help the business by bringing in new potential clients, and no one could see it. And it's really frustrating when people think you're a threat rather than an asset, and it's really demotivating.
Yeah.
I was just to add to that, James. So I had this discussion on LinkedIn, and I was trying to think, okay, so I put on my hat of working in innovation, where you have to kind of break things up and find out how things are done, ask questions, be curious, but position it in how can we make things better. So when hiring an innovation person, I've told people, think the first question I ask is, how could you get yourself sacked within 3 to 6 months? And then I find out what are their plans to get themselves sacked. And the best way to get themselves sacked is to do something that's going to really make the CEO, the CFO nervous, because it's a pivot of the brand that needs to happen. And then that person needs the people in the innovation roles to kind of back them up. But that's an innovation role. And I know that's a ballsy approach. And even in this discussion, I had someone jump in and say, that's why you only lasted X months at my company, Jon. So it does backfire. But don't you think that approach in this time, when we're trying to help other brands be more digital, that you have to sort of at least privately go around and say, how can you personally help me shake things up? Obviously, you got to temper that with don't go directly to the CEO on your first day with that. But it's just what do you guys think of that philosophy? Is that too brave?
I think you have to adopt a philosophy that works for you, and you have to find your own way, don't you? And all of us in the industry and many others build their reputations in different ways. And some people like to keep it low key, and others they are who they are. And I think if that's you, suppressing it actually does you a disservice, because you end up working with businesses that don't embrace you for who you are, and then you're just basically back in working for a company then.
Yeah. I think it's more natural. It's like any brand, isn't it? When you're telling the truth, it's going to come across better, and it's going to come across as you're telling your story. Like for my personal brand, like I said, I think we talked about this the other day when I was talking about, I'm the same online as I am in real life, and that's just kind of what I'm portraying online is literally just an extension of me. I feel like that's going to be more honest than trying to be someone that you're not necessarily are, or trying to put something on as that's not real. So I think people believe in people, don't they? People kind of fall in love with people. So that's best when you are just yourself. And I think some people aren't always, which is quite interesting as well.
Yeah. And also, if it means that you don't win a project working for a company where your cultural values aren't aligned, then you've dodged a bullet anyway, because those projects end up not working out very well and being quite frustrating. And I think that's the joy of trying to build a brand, is aligning yourself with other people whose values you buy into.
What does that mean?
I think Gerry's wanting some love. Play something, Gerry.
You okay, Gerry?
Gerry's ready to kick us out.
I didn't do anything.
Did I trigger it with a specific word?
I don't know.
I know. Well done, James.
Don't say Siri right now.
It might just be like a word that happens. So something that someone's kind of just sent in is recently a head of NFL team PR was fired over this tweet, a historic day. For every little girl out there, you can be anything you dream of, due to poor culture fit. So how much do you guys think that damages the brand?
Oh boy. So anyone who knows me knows I will sound off about women's equality, especially in the workplace. Wrote a whole blog post about it. I think that, number one, it was a really poor firing. The excuse of saying she was a poor culture fit is exactly that, just an excuse. Some, dare I say it, no offense to anyone, old white man who owns that team, the Texans in Houston, probably got a little bit upset over this tweet. The tweet was in reference, I believe, to Kamala Harris becoming the first African-American and Asian vice president that the U.S. has ever seen. But more importantly, she's the first female vice president that the U.S. has ever seen. And one of her very large statements was that she is the first woman to hold that role, but she will not be the last. And it was kind of like a rally cry to all of the little girls, not only across the US, but across the world, to say to them that you can do this too. And I think that any organization that gets upset for one of their employees trying to empower other women, and more importantly, other young girls, of really going out there and working hard to achieve their dreams, is fundamentally wrong. And if it doesn't hurt the brand, it should hurt the brand, in my personal opinion. And I think it will hurt the brand.
It can only say that the brand is a male chauvinist, and that's it. That is what it says for me. It's like
100%. You take into consideration.
Like that.
Sorry, James.
I said the sad thing is there'll be a certain percentage of the audience who will love that response to it, and that's the kind of conceit that has to be unpicked. But you're right. I mean, it should damage the brand. It fundamentally should.
And especially right now, because obviously we've talked about the pandemic, but the other worldwide pandemic is obviously racial inequality issues that have spanned the globe. And so, as part of that, women's equality is very much a piece of the conversation. It's not as large of a conversation as the racial inequality, but it very much is still part of that conversation. And I think any organization that wants to denounce that, whether or not it comes from their own brand or from their employees, is on the back foot and probably needs quite a bit of a talking to, because you're clearly out of touch with what's going on in the world today. You're also probably going to be out of touch with the millennial audience very, very soon, knowing how much the millennial audience has both the buying power as well as the professional power coming of age right now, and they're the ones that are going to make or break a brand.
On that, it is good to see.
I'll step off.
No. I think it's really good to see people being held to task for those kind of comments. Like I'm sure you guys read about the senator who just kind of innocently, according to his worldview, on Twitter said, well, if Biden becomes president and if he dies, would the Indian be the president? He literally called her the Indian, like she has a name, and he has resigned. But anyone who says that kind of thing, they need to resign. They're alienating themselves to the world we live in. It's plain and simple.
Yeah, completely agree. Completely agree.
No, definitely. And I think we had a bit of a technical, James. Yeah. James,
I obviously offended people when I got kicked out.
I know.
Sorry, James.
So in terms of kind of finishing, kind of going back from necessary personal branding, but back to kind of the brand and the product, kind of should you be able to fit your brand and adopt a different approach online to make it work online, or should it necessarily be kind of the brand as its kind of message or ethos within itself anyway? If that makes sense.
I'm curious to see what James has to say, because James, you work with some really big brands that are both online and offline presences with both brick and mortar as well as strong e-commerce. Like you mentioned House of Fraser, for example. I'm curious to see how they tackle that.
So I guess the answer to me is basically your customer doesn't think is you online or offline, right? Your customer is your customer, and they shop across channels and across marketing campaigns and you name it. And they might drop in and drop out. So to fundamentally have different values communicated, different styles and tones of communication through on and offline doesn't make sense. What does make sense is tailoring your messaging based on audience groups and segments and personas, which comes down to understanding your customer base and knowing how to talk to people. And that's standard. If you're a massive brand like House of Fraser, you have so many different audiences, not just traditional gender-based ones, but age-based ones, but also like, demographics, international audiences where actually cultural differences means tone. I mean, Aleyda will know this way better than me, tonality of language changes, etc. So I don't think it's about changing your values and your core proposition. It's about understanding how you tailor your communication to appeal to those different people. And the ones that I see do that best are the ones who put data behind it. And the Wine Society, the best company I've worked with who really put data and customer profiling. They might not have the sexiest looking website. They might not do all the latest, coolest like AR, VR stuff that some other brands do. But I'll tell you what, they know their audience, they know their segments, and they know what they want and what they don't want. And they regularly talk to them and find out, and they poll them and they survey them and they tailor what they do to those people. And that to me is smart. And they get really, really good conversion rates and customer retention rates as members off the back of it.
What was the name of that brand? Sorry, James, I missed it.
The Wine Society. So I noticed Aleyda's been enjoying the red wine tonight. Yes. It's a great brand to join if you ever move to the UK. Believe me, it's brilliant.
Do they do bubbles or just wine?
They do. Yes, they do. It's a membership organisation, so therefore
Googling immediately after. Send me that voucher code, James, because I'm on it.
Excellent. I'll just get out my affiliate link. Yeah.
Nice. Yes. Spoken as a true marketer.
And how much? So we've got a few other questions, but how much does the brand and the product kind of overlap? So you've got brands such as kind of eBay, Amazon, and Tinder, and all those brands that have built themselves as being the right product, whereas other brands kind of put the brand first and then the product later. So how does that overlap? How does it work? How can it work with future brands?
Well, I think that the two different scenarios that you've just laid out, where product comes before brand versus brand coming before products, I think brand coming before product is probably a bit of an older scenario, one in which stems from, you know, your historical structure of traditional ad agencies and creative agencies, where somebody created an organization and then their second stop was to create the brand. And then after the brand was created, they went to market with their product and or service. And that was, dare I say, it's like pre-internet age, pre-e-commerce, right? Where we didn't have direct-to-consumer brands, where you had to actually curate what you stood for in the beginning before you went to market. And I think that with rapid adoption of the concept of direct-to-consumer brand, we have this abilities of actually putting our product out there and allowing our brand to be fluid, like an always-on living thing, where it adapts and it changes and it evolves based off of the consumer dynamics and behaviors that we're seeing, and also too, it based upon the industries in which we function. You know, prime example, I work in fintech, and what fintech meant, you know, 5 years ago is not the same thing as what fintech means today. And so having to evolve to the dynamics of the market also should impact your brand and what it stands for, what it represents, and how you deliver that brand to the customer.
I think that it's important also that when you develop a brand, especially now online, we see a lot of community first type of an audience first type of companies, right? That you're able to live up to the expectations that you create or you build. We have seen many cases, for example, and I mentioned this because Ran himself has mentioned this in the past, right? With SEO Moss, right? It was huge. It was like the first community. And then at some point when they started finding their way through different versions of their product, at some point they couldn't live up with the less expectations, right? What they built was not necessarily what people were looking for at that stage, right, in the market. So again, it's important that you build a brand, but also your product needs to be to that level. That can be a little bit risky too, because one of my top clients right now, he's pivoting from being an email marketing type of tool to be marketing automation, much more generic, right? So it's important to understand why people are coming to you directly, because who you are and how established you are in this market, but how you start opening up to all the type of services and offerings, and how you also expand your brand to be known for these other reasons too. So it's something that it takes work, much more work, I will say, once that you are very well known as X, right? To be known also for Y or Z in a very prominent and good way, because you need to live up to the expectations, and sometimes that is even harder.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. And how do you guys feel about, so this is necessarily taking a little bit of a shift, but looking at how brands are adopting like new technologies, so such as like TikTok, all sorts of social channels. Do you kind of finding that the brands are adopting these social channels that they need to, or are they kind of sticking to what they usually do? How would you see it going moving forward? Like, do I need, as a brand, do I need to jump into all these new technologies that come, or can I just stick with what I know and continue to adapt?
I guess it's where are your customers and what value is it adding to them? Because there's too much content in this world already. It blows my mind. And most of it's shit. There are very few brands that have consistently good content. I mean, I know I'm guilty of it. Some of my content is probably quite atrocious too. But so for me, it's like when I see brands doing it really smartly, I'm thinking more about an e-commerce rather than digital marketing. The others will be able to add more on the marketing channels. But it's where brands have understood that their audience is primarily using like social using chat bots and social messenger apps rather than email and SMS, and they've put concierge services into WhatsApp, so they're tailoring to their audience because that's how they want to hear from them, and that's how they want to do customer service, and that's how they want to communicate. They don't want to wait 48 hours for an email. So that to me is when, I know WhatsApp's not new, but it's that premise of where is the customer and what is adding value. I think that to me is when it gets traction.
Mm-hmm. On that front, I think it absolutely, James, wherever your customers are, you've got to be, but because I work in the world of sport, mentioning TikTok or with Trump banning the Triller or Reels or whatever it is in America for American sport in the future. I think today was the deadline for TikTok there. But if fans are experiencing joy when they can't watch their players, then you have to be there as a sports team or brand sponsor. And crucially, you need your players to be amazing at it. And fortunately, in lockdown, if a player on any sports team globally wasn't on TikTok, that they were then, and the club encouraged them. But what I will say with that is then it becomes, there's too much noise there. So I think the smart clubs have been able to look, well, that's the young people, but is our entire audience TikTok audience? No. So we should also, the experience of our brand, what if our brand is customer service? I'd love to show a couple of little slides if Gerry's on the slide master. Gerry, can we show slide 4, 5, 4, then 5, then 6? Oh yeah. So I love the fact that this is again a sports, because that's where I work. So apologies for those who hate sport, but I love the fact that while the NBA was doing all these screens and seeing yourself on the screen, and sometimes it worked and sometimes there was no one on the screen, Pittsburgh Pirates decided, well, yes, there's all these cardboard cutouts of fans in the seats, but we are going to literally go and keep track of wherever a fly ball hits, whatever fan it hits, we're going to run and get that ball, mark on the ball what seat that is, who belongs it, and send it with an autographed shirt and blah, blah, blah. And I love that example. Next one, if we have time, Gerry. And this is my club. Sorry, I have to speak in my club. Sometimes older people, I hate to admit it, but I am one of those people, even though I freaking love TikTok. Older people aren't on TikTok. This guy just wanted to take the piss out of the young people on TikTok, because the young people on TikTok love this horrible second kit for my team. Young people love it. So he puts on his wife's dress and puts it on Facebook. Wolves see the post and they send him it. I love customer service. Written letters can be as powerful as TikTok. So I would say brands, not just sports brands, all brands have got to switch it up and do analog and digital, as long as they know that is where a certain sector of our audience are.
Mm-hmm. Cool. We've had a few questions come in, so we'll kind of get through so we get some times. This one's from James Forrester. I think that's how you pronounce it. Any quick tips on must avoid when starting up your own brand from scratch, especially in the retail? I like the true to yourself advice. Anyone want to tackle that one?
Sure, if no one else wants to go, because I am probably the most verbose person. Well, yeah, I think that when you take a look at must avoids, right? I think that there's some obvious ones that probably shouldn't be said, but you've asked, so I'll say them. You know, anything that is offensive to another person based off of their, you know, race or gender or sexual orientation or anything like that. I think, you know, especially in the world in which we live today, make sure that the personal brand you're building isn't offensive to somebody else. You know, making sure that you're authentic in the brand. I know that the person who asked the question said other than being true to yourself. But I think that is the most important thing too. And in building a personal brand, I think that you also have to take into consideration is what do you want to be known for? And more importantly, what do you not want to be known for? And craft and curate your brand against both of those ideals.
Your values. Yeah, I mean, anything that goes against your values, you should identify those very well as what you actually believe in. So you know how to handle those scenarios that will come very likely. Like when, for example, like with clients or sponsorships or partnerships, who you want to be related with, what you want to offer, what you want to avoid, what you definitely don't want to support or to give money to. So for example, you probably will have certain rules or guidelines to communicate to. So everything should reflect what you believe. That, for example, being offensive, like cultural aspects also matter a lot. Like, and for example, if you want to target the Latin American market, for example, the way that things can be promoted and what can be done. So for example, the level of sexism in certain areas. I remember 3 years ago, still going to some trade shows, and seeing the typical booth ladies still. So that for me was like shocking, because I was not used at all anymore in Europe or in the US or in other markets, but for in Latin America was quite common still. So again, you need to be very aware who's your audience, which are your values, and how you can communicate those in a very straightforward way, and identify and eliminate and specify rules and protocols to handle those that don't really reflect what you want, your vision, your mission, your culture. Yeah.
And on top of that, just adding to that, I think that do more with less. I think a lot of people try to make sure that they're on every channel. Like, for example, I know a ton of people in my space as a keynote speaker guy that they literally just own LinkedIn. They cannot do Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, etc. I get no money for this on an affiliate level, but a friend of mine, Mark Schaefer, that wrote a book called Known, and I think it is it's the best of his 5 or 6 books, but it's a book you have to read. You have to read it, but I'll summarize it in one acronym. As you start your personal brand, sometimes you will be tended, sorry, this is a prop. Sometimes you will do things that are just showing off. It is just you showing off. But before you show off, and I'm guilty of it, but before I show off, now that I read Mark's book, I make sure, is it right? And that's RITE. He made it up, not me. Is this bit of show off content relevant to my audience? Is it interesting? Holding up a Lego man is in this one case. Is it timely, and is it entertaining? I think if you stick to relevant, interesting, timely, entertaining, you don't even need props. You can just be yourself.
Yeah, the one thing I would add is around humility, and it ties back to being true to yourself, is if you pretend that you're bulletproof and you're always right and nothing's ever wrong, then you erode trust really quickly. And having honesty with your audience, whether you are selling in an e-commerce environment to customers or you're in B2B or whatever it might be that you is your service, is just admit that you're not perfect. Because actually transparency and honesty, you might lose a few people along the way who think, oh, that's a bit weak, but actually you'll build far more loyal audience if you're just honest and transparent at the start, instead of pretending you know everything. And one of the things that I've learned over the years that's helped me massively as a consultant is accepting that there are far smarter people than me in so many different areas, and actually seeing that as an advantage, not a threat. And too many people, I think, try and make themselves bulletproof, like they have to know everything. And you don't.
Yeah.
I think with that advantage, not a threat thing, James, that really rang some bells, and I'm feeling very guilty about this because I went through the 5 stages of grief, not being able to speak. But I think starting off as your personal brand, you need to literally find a mentor for everything. Like for me doing Zoom, need a mentor for that. For me doing workshops, digital transformation, content strategy, mentor for that. And just go and just ask questions. Don't stalk them. That hasn't worked for me that well. But don't you think, like, mentors, like, or don't you think you need to get to some level where we think, oh, I'm 40, I don't need a mentor? Yes, you need a mentor until you're, I would say, 86.
I think it's the famous saying that if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room.
I love that.
I like that saying.
Or you're on your own.
Yeah.
I'm just sat at home on my own. So yeah, the smartest person. Well, it's questionable. There might be someone else over there. But no, I like that. That's cool. And as a brand, we've kind of, another question that we've kind of thought of as well is, should you fit in or should you be different? Like, what are the risks and rewards of adopting a different approach online as opposed to fitting in?
What I think what it is important is to understand what is your unique selling proposition, right? What makes you unique? What is the value and what differentiates you versus the other companies or brands out there that offer something similar in your market, right? And who have the same audience? What makes you different? And what it is important for you as a brand is to communicate that very clearly and to show that, right? And promote that in a way that is meaningful, relevant, entertaining, engaging to your audience, right? So it's more about amplifying that I will say, rather than coming up with something fake, right? It's like, for example, if I want to stand out, I will start like dressing in a way that is not me, or I don't know, wearing heels.
I feel like
so it's not me, right? So it is important that it's again aligned with your values, with your what your unique selling proposition, something that actually makes sense in what you offer.
I feel like a few things that you kind of all said across all the questions. It's about the transparency and honesty of kind of just being yourself and being as a brand and finding out what that brand values. So I think that's really interesting across it all.
I also think it's interesting that that establish what makes you stand out, what's your unique bit, as you both said, but B, don't be afraid to use your channels. If it's LinkedIn that you're going to own, then use that, and use your growing group of friends. Look for the people who have really bold opinions that you disagree with, and ask them what they think about a bold opinion that you disagree, that you have, that lots of people disagree with. Peter Thiel, the famous Google question was, what is Google to get an interview at a job at Google? It was, wasn't it, what's the one thing that you feel so strongly about that you think everyone disagrees with you? And if you start with that in your personal brand statement, I think, as Aleyda, you said, your uniqueness will funnel out of that.
Mm-hmm. We've had another question come in from Donna. So what brands, do you think are smashing it at the moment, and why? James, I feel like you had an answer to that one.
Yeah, I know this is like how long have we got?
How long's piece of string? Like there's some definite brands at the moment that are nailing it.
A few I know that are doing it, absolutely smashing it from an e-commerce point of view. Gymshark 2019, 2020 have absolutely nailed it. I mean, they built out a pretty much cult following. They're very good on social, and their e-commerce is pretty smoking hot as well. So, but they've got a cool product. Yeah. And they know their audience. And I think comes back to my point earlier, is they know their audience, and they know what their audience likes and what appeals to them.
I was also going to add to James's point there, and ironically, Gymshark is the perfect example of this, is that you're seeing a lot of brands double down on being purpose-driven, right? They're putting causes and purpose at the very center of their brand, especially these days. And Gymshark is one of those. Like, again, going back to the Black Lives Matter protests in the US back in May, there was a particular gentleman who was seen cleaning up after some of the riots in Brooklyn, New York, and his photo went viral. Someone at Gymshark, I believe it was Noel, who is their head of brand, and they basically decided to track down this gentleman that they saw in a photo wearing a Gymshark t-shirt and refund every Gymshark order that he's ever placed in his entire life. And it was all because they doubled down on the whole concept of equality and, getting behind the Black Lives Matter movement. And so I think the brands that are really becoming noteworthy and stand out are the brands that are putting that purpose and are putting their core values at the very heart of what their brand stands for these days. I'm like the biggest fangirl, and I have been for quite some time, of Nike. And I know that it'll be contentious and some people love it or hate it, but Nike is a brand that has beyond doubled down on the Black Lives Matter movement recently. But what I think a lot of people neglect to realize is that Nike got behind Colin Kaepernick over 2 years ago, when Colin Kaepernick started taking a knee in a silent protest against what was happening around racial inequality in the US. And Nike came out with that famous Colin Kaepernick campaign that basically spoke to that. And a lot of people started burning Nike shoes and this, that, and the other. But you know what? Nike knew that they were taking a risk for putting that campaign out there. They knew what they were doing going into it, and that they would get backlash, and they did it anyways because it's a cause and it's something that they fundamentally believe in. And I think that we will just continue to see a lot more purpose-driven brands, or brands pivoting to become more purpose-driven as we move into, post-pandemic era, whatever that might potentially look like for us.
Mm-hmm. And do you feel like it's social that's been at the heart of this brand's growth? Because I feel like Gymshark have nailed that on social. I feel like that's where they're tapping into. It'd be interesting to see what you think. It's not just social; it's other areas as well.
But it comes from the values, doesn't it? Again, coming back to like Aleyda and Jen's earlier points, is if they didn't have those values to support those causes and not just do it from a tacky like PR point, because if it's badly executed again on off value, right, it comes across as like a lame PR attempt or marketing attempt.
Yeah, sorry. What, for example, I especially regarding values, right, and something that I particularly believe in, and something that I use, and when I started to use them, it was pretty much because they came forward to support that Basecamp for remote work, and then now with their new service, Hey, the new email system. Literally, like, they don't necessarily reinvent the wheel, but they believe on something: simplicity, avoid intrusiveness, working in a balanced way, in a healthy way, work from whatever you love. And so those type of principles are things that I pretty much believe in, and they are very straightforward and vocal about. And literally, when I consume their products, they are the first brand that I think of, because they reflect what I believe in, what I support of. And so I think if it is something genuine, it doesn't come forward as self-promotion, right? Or right now they are of course leveraging the remote work trend, but I know that this is something that they have always supported. So even if they are right now like selling books, whatever, I don't see that as them leveraging a bad situation or a scenario. It's them being themselves and supporting something that they have always supported, right?
Mm-hmm. And just on top of that, Will, you asked about, like, is it social? Is it everything? I as a guy who's like worked a lot in social, I would love to claim that all the brilliance happens and starts in social. But when you mention a brand like Burger King, I know for a fact that it doesn't start in social. It starts within knowing who they are, knowing who their customers are, and just trying every innovative thing imaginable to stand out and do things that just blow your mind. From in the sports world, they stupidly paid £50,000 to sponsor the crappiest team in the football league, in League Two, which is 4 divisions down. But it was smart because they knew that having that Burger King logo on the jersey meant that they were in FIFA, the video game, and they had the best players in the world playing with their Burger King on, and they gave out free tweets with the best plays, ended up getting loads of coupons, and it made an international success about a month ago. But they've also, Gerry, my last of my visual aids, apologies, but I just love visuals. Not that one, or that one, or that one, or that one. Not that one. That one, yeah. So how many brands do you know that just change their products based on their environment and can do it at the drop of a hat? So they created in Italy, Burger King Italia created the social distancing Whopper. So you could go through any drive-through, because it was a social distancing time, no restaurants available, and you could order the social distancing Whopper, which had like triple the amount of onions, so no one would want to get near you. Your breath was so bad. I loved that. And then next and final visual aid from me, this I'm sorry, this just happened last week, and I cannot understand how this got through. It's way too ballsy. Their headline is "Order from McDonald's," because the UK was going through another lockdown, and basically there's thousands of people who work in the restaurant industry, and they need to have their jobs. So I love that they're encouraging to go to the competition. On Twitter, because that's my land, they even went a step farther. After this tweet said go to Domino's Pizza, Pizza Hut, etc., they listed every single burger restaurant that is a competitor of theirs in the United Kingdom, and said, you really need to go to these places as well. I just think we need to be as innovative as them, and just self-effacing, follow the lead of brands that know themselves and can be that sort of generous, because that's what people need right now.
Mm-hmm. No, that's really cool. We've had one last question, so final question here. I feel like it's going to be a good one. This is from Judy, and is it more difficult for women to stand out as individual brands? Controversial.
Go on, Aleyda.
Yeah,
you start, and then I'll comment.
Well, more difficult. Well, this is the thing, right? When I started building what you can consider to be a brand, literally, there were even less women than they are today in SEO. So I don't know if that necessarily went against me or not to stand out. What I definitely knew is that since I didn't have a reference or like something necessarily like very clear to me to look up to, I knew that I needed to do my own thing, right? Me doing myself, or you being you. For me, this is what it has been always about, and that is why I have never thought too much about, well, necessarily how difficult it might have been. Maybe if I had followed the road or the path that someone else had, maybe it would have frustrated me, because potentially I wouldn't have been offered the same jobs or the same salary than many men out there. But literally, since I did my own thing, potentially it's because that I didn't perceive those sort of challenges, thankfully. But I can pretty much still see sometimes, right, when it is me speaking versus other guys, there's still this tendency, right, for the men to be perceived or come forward that more trustful sometimes, or to be rely much more on things like that. So I really feel that I need to be very, very careful on social media, on Twitter, for example, on what I say, that it cannot be manipulated, or it is not ambiguous. So anybody else will say, oh, she doesn't know what she's talking about, or something like that. Now that I actually, you made me remember something that I was reminded of a couple of weeks ago, that a year ago I did this Reddit Ask Me Something in the our SEO subreddit, right? And people leaving questions before I went and answer, and there was literally this SEO bro type of comment saying, "Her, really?" It's like, but then again, thankfully, we are already at a moment where we are very aware of it. Also, between men, we have a lot of very outspoken, supportive people around, and they came forward and they say, look, blocked, eliminated, what are you talking about? She knows her thing, she knows what she says. And even last year, right, this was not 5 years ago or 10 years ago. So I can definitely see how hard it might be, even for someone who's just starting, to be outspoken, to share what she knows, to get out there and speak, right? Thankfully, there are many more efforts going on, groups like the Women in Tech SEO group, to support that and to empower that. But yes, maybe I was lucky enough to do my own thing and overlook the established path by many, because otherwise, potentially, I will be much more frustrated.
It is harder, though. There's a great example, Emma Watson, the actor from Harry Potter series, who's incredibly well known. She became a UN ambassador speaking around equality, and she did the most incredible talk to the United Nations around what equality for women was, and how objectification of women. And at the end of it, the media picked up on, how can you be a feminist when you've posed in lingerie for magazines? And it's just this whole judgmental attitude that still exists, and there is still large swathes of male society that's threatened by smart, intelligent women, and it's sad. In the same way that Jen talked earlier about, the issues with race and colour and whatever it might be, is there's still people threatened by this, and I think it amplifies in certain areas more. I see it because I work more kind of in the technology side of digital e-commerce, and there is definitely an element, and I've seen this in meetings where super smart female developers or people working in test leads, whatever, get looked over for male colleagues who aren't as qualified because they're not associated with being technically smart, because they should probably do the marketing side. And I think there's a certain level of stereotyping and arrogance that still needs to be stripped apart. And it is a barrier. It definitely is. And I think you're right, Aleyda, that there's two bits to it, that men as well have to understand that and try and champion and support and call it out when they see it.
I think what's actually quite interesting, though, if we just stop and take a look at the question asked by a female, right?
Mm-hmm.
No male would ever ask that question in a million years. So I think just as much as men need to also help be allies and advocate for the equality of women, women also too, we have to get out of our own way, right? We have to overcome this level of thinking that we're not good enough and that we're not on par with men, because we absolutely are. And in a lot of scenarios, we're fundamentally much better in certain job roles and leadership positions than men. No offense, but the global pandemic. Let's take a look at the countries that are doing well, right? And I think that we as women kind of need to overcome that if we're going to kind of help ourselves a little bit from coming off of that back foot, right? So believing in ourselves, having confidence in ourselves that, yeah, we can create our own personal brand just as well and just as confidently as the male stood next to us.
As a gay man, I would say I actually prefer women. I literally do. Women I think are a lot smarter, more intelligent. So anyway, leave you at Gerry's face doesn't look like he agrees, but I do.
Sorry, as a gay man, you prefer women?
It's surprising as a gay man. You wouldn't think I prefer women, but I do.
Right, guys, we've got a question for you. As the panel, who asked the best question and which one was it? Because they win 6 months of SEMrush.
I like the last one because that's one where you could quite easily end up in disagreements, and it is provocative, right? And provocative questions make you rethink things and challenge yourself. So that for me is the best question, because I reckon we could carry on for hours debating this.
I'm definitely not debating that one. I'm not again.
I've been drinking, so I remember the last one very well.
I was going to say, actually, I think the question with regards to the NFL PR comms woman being fired, I think that is very much a fantastic question, and it alludes to a couple of different points that, again, we could probably talk about infinitely, or I could at least.
Gerry, can I have a write-in vote for Keely Jacob? Because 22 minutes ago, she fed a bunch of bourbon to her 3 bunnies, and I'm sure they're pissed by now. But it's a really nice. It's a really nice photo. It does seem a little bit cruel to animals, but it's a really nice photo on our hashtag TIO chat.
Yes, I would say so. Okay, yeah. I don't think I can award that as a question.
No, you can't. I have a question about the health of her bunnies, but I don't. Maybe that's not good. Yeah. So that's cruelty to animals.
Keely is a very interesting lady. I won't go into details about it. So okay. You're basically saying the prize is for Judith on the Cam Girls kind of. I can't remember the question now. I might have had a glance or two of them. And the other prize that we've got is basically who took a photograph with a brand, and unfortunately, is going to be Yanni.
Oh yes.
I love the fact that it's kind of like just kind of off-brand. But yeah, we didn't get too many brilliant entries. That was the best entry, which is quite depressing because it's Yanni. Brilliant. Okay, so we have Michelle. You're organising an after party, aren't you?
Yeah, so we have a Zoom chat. I believe Gerry put that out to everyone, so we'll see you there.
Okay, so if you go to takeitoffline.co.uk/afterparty, you can carry on drinking and chatting and stuff like that. We would say we would buy you a drink, but it's basically a bring your own bottle affair.
Thank you guys for having me. I have England versus Ireland and USA versus Wales to watch at 8 p.m. But I'm up for a drink next time for sure. But thanks for letting me join.
Brilliant, absolutely fantastic. All right, guys, we'll talk to all of you soon.
Cool.
Thank you very much. It was nice.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Take care.
Love you, Keely.